Hello, dog fans. Welcome to DawgDial. I'm your host, Josh Mendlinger, with my partner, Joel Taco Thompson, here at Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia, on Highway 92. Coming to you live, and wanted to chat with you all about everything University of Georgia sports, University of Georgia Bulldog football, and especially about that big win over Florida in Jacksonville. The 42-7 win. It was an impressive running game, good game management by the quarterback, decisive defense being shown with turnovers as well as scoring on the defense. We'll get into that. And also a little, I guess you could say, low amount of depth by Florida due to suspensions and other problems within their system going on there. But it was an impressive win for the University of Georgia Bulldogs, and I think the fans in the Dog Nation, Taco, are going to be quite excited about this outcome and the future going into the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think the Bulldogs ended the streak, the 0-3 last three games. The talk before the game, well, you never know what's going to happen when we go to Jacksonville to play the Gators. So I think what you saw this year, and you start to see it more and more every week, that the Bulldogs are on a path. They are on a war path, and the opponent really doesn't matter. Their game planning is good. Their execution is good, and that trip to Gainesville was a good one this Saturday.
Absolutely. I think dog fans are going to be buzzing. Hate to use that term for a Bulldog fan, but I think
barking. Bark or
that's
buzz.
A better
Bark.
term. Barking.
Yeah,
I
barking.
think barking is the best thing about that Tuesday night announcement that'll be coming out. We'll get into that when it comes down to the playoff situation. So
Trick-or-treat section.
You bet.
The trick-or-treat section.
So stick with us, dog fans. We'll be right back on DawgDial.
Mr. Eason got in the game.
Yes. We'll have to get to that. All right. Welcome back, dog fans. This is Josh Mendlinger with Taco Thompson, live at Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia. Thanks for joining us on DawgDial. Once again, we are here to talk about the University of Georgia's football game against the University of Florida Gators and the stomping that the Georgia Bulldogs did on top of those Gators.
It's a pretty good day in Jacksonville. The Dogs came out ready. 21 unanswered points right off the get-go. And, of course, Georgia. Some people wondering what the game planning was going to be, run, pass. Well, Georgia came out and decided they were going to run the football, had some really wide-open, explosive runs by that Red Brigade. And I think they well established the running game. We talked about, I think Fromm had only 7 pass completions, one, unfortunately, to the other team. But yes. Georgia got on a good roll with the running game. Right. They pounded the ball, and when they had to pass it, they did complete 4 of the 7 passes, and there were some good long passes, nice little touchdown thrown by Fromm. But, boy, when you run the ball and like Georgia did and run it for 8 yards a carry, that's pretty strong. And then I saw interesting stats that Georgia, by the way, had 300 yards, close to 300 yards, 292 rushing on the day. Mm-hmm. But, and they didn't have the ball very much. They really didn't need to. 9.4 yards of play for the Georgia offense. So
that's pretty good by any stance. That's close to a first down on every play. So, especially with the time of possession difference that was going on there, for those who didn't note it, Florida actually had the ball a lot more time than Georgia did. It just the efficiency and the effectiveness of the game, the offensive game, was very helpful, and the fact that the Georgia Bulldogs were able to get at turnovers and all those sacks that we'll get into.
Gators won time of possession.
They certainly did. They did win that. I think it was 34, almost 35 minutes to 23 minutes officially, and I think it was a not a good showing to have 34 minutes of on display for the University of Florida on national TV. That it almost seemed like 34 minutes or 35 minutes of just proving the point that the Florida Gators just don't have it this year.
Just not there, and I think they realized that after making a coaching change. We'll go ahead and make note of that after this game, and we don't want to say that Georgia caused it, but
No.
certainly there's going to be a coaching change in Gainesville. But shifting back to the other dimension of where Georgia's strength does come out is Georgia's defense did have another outstanding game. The Gators were going to come out and try to run it. Of course, when you get behind, you're going to be throwing it. So what we saw a little bit this weekend was a passing rush. So I think you had some stats. We saw the Georgia defense get in the backfield and get after that quarterback.
They did. If they weren't pulling down the quarterback with their 5 sacks on the day, I believe it was the final tally on that, they were certainly rushing that quarterback and putting him under duress and causing all sorts of bad decisions by their quarterback and other players. It was a game filled with penalties by the Florida Gators. It was also there were a good number of penalties on Georgia as well, but not when it truly counted, I guess you could say. And the fact is that Georgia was able to put Felipe Franks under such duress that they just couldn't get anything going.
Duress, yeah. He was 10 of 25 through 1 pick. Sanders got him on a pick. We talked about Sanders moving up to number 2.
Yep, he's number 2 in all-time
career
Georgia
picks for Georgia, so that's good.
Yeah,
and Georgia defense had some turnovers. The fumble recovery for a touchdown
You bet.
is a big play, so your defense is getting turnovers. Georgia had, the 1 interception, but no fumbles, so you're ahead in the turnover ratio in that game.
Yes.
And, really, Georgia was pitching a shutout. And there was one play in the game there in the second half when the interception.
Sure.
And, of course, the Georgia defense, the number 1 starters, put a stop to Florida when they were threatening. So that could have been a momentum shift in the game. But, again, the Georgia defense stepped up and put a stop to it and redirected. So, the 7 points that the Gators did score, again, was towards that, I think, like 2.5 left in the game.
Right, and it was basically against second and third string players. Not that they shouldn't be able to stop the Gators team, but it certainly they were coming in cold off the bench, so to speak, and sometimes that just doesn't get the job done.
Yeah.
But you can't fault them for that. That's for certain.
Well, it would have been, I think I saw a stat, it was something like 360 games where Florida had always scored points. So don't you know that the Georgia fan base would have loved to have had that in their back pocket. And I know
No
the
doubt.
defensive players, you talked about it, we talked about, the players and how much the sideline activity seems to be a different regime over there on the sideline field amongst the players.
Before we got on air today, I was mentioning that the Bulldog sideline appears to be having a lot of fun. This season, it's not just fun when you're winning, but it's actual fun on the field, fun on the sideline. There seem to be gelling, bonding, and it's all at the right time, obviously, that it wasn't just early and they've given it up. They've held on to it this year. And taking all the excitement with them every game with the golden shoulder spikes and the shoulder pads.
They're tough. I want to get me a pair of those.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that, right?
Do they have those at the sporting goods store? Maybe we can get a pair of those.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's probably on the Bulldog websites. You can go out to other websites and maybe order one by the end of this year. I'm sure it'll be a kid's, able to
phenomenon.
You bet.
That's happening.
We'll have to see. We'll look into a pair for future shows for you there, Taco.
Yep.
That would be an interesting look for you, though.
But
they had a good time. And I'll tell you, one person I just noticed was having a good time on the field as well was number 66, the right guard for Georgia. He was just absolutely having a fun time out there on the kind of the big running games, on the big runs for Georgia. He was hopping and jumping around. You probably noticed him if you were on TV. He was in the red arm sleeves the whole game and all that. And he was just Well, on the big runs, he was hopping around in excitement. I think that is just kind of showing what Georgia is feeling, just by their success, and because they've had success in the past. But I think it's just there's just a pure overall joy to the game, and I think you can see it in every movement going on.
And we'll talk a little bit later about what that does to the fan base. Of course, Georgia moves up to number 2. We'll get into the playoff contentions later in the show.
I think we will, yes.
But absolutely, you went to the Jacksonville looking for a football game. A track meet broke out.
Yes.
And that Georgia rushing game still continues to pound it and run up and down the field. I just don't think the Gators are overall. Georgia's blowing out everybody with Notre Dame being an exception, and we'll talk about that too, where Notre Dame fits into this equation. But Florida just not that good on Saturday, and I think the point spread was like 14, and I think we both predicted that they would well cover that.
Yes,
and they certainly did.
I think we did. So I tell you what, let's take a quick break here on DawgDial, and then we'll come back and maybe we'll chat a little bit about that. Top rate. Well, the ratings that are coming out for the playoffs. That's coming out on Tuesday on Halloween Eve. Or Halloween night. So we'll be right back. Stick with us. We'll be right back on DawgDial. Go Dogs. So you want to debrief on anything before we get into the?
You got any interesting stats that pop out that we didn't cover before we get to that?
Only 2 penalties in the first half, I believe, for the Georgia Bulldogs. But we did talk about there were a bunch of penalties.
Well, here's I would like to hit on a couple of these national stats.
Okay. Where are they?
Say they're third in total defense.
I think we should do that.
Third in scoring, 11.9 points a game. That trails only Alabama and Va-Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And 31st in total offense. And that's 4th in the SEC.
That current?
Yeah, this is after that game.
Okay.
That's interesting, though. It's 4th in the SEC behind Alabama, Missouri, and Auburn.
Yeah.
And scored 38.1 points a game, so it might be good to just kind of take a snapshot of where we are.
Sure.
I can just read off some of these,
I'll
and maybe
set
we
that
can
up and introduce
conjecture.
you to it.
Yeah.
There we go. We'll do that. Okay. All right. All right, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm your host, Josh Mendlinger with Taco Thompson, and we are here to keep going on the big win, 42-7 win over Florida in Jacksonville by the Georgia Bulldogs. It started off with a couple of big plays right in the first series from Swift taking down the field for a big screenplay that got a whole bunch of yards. I think
See that beating he put on the defensive back,
He
Chauncey
did.
Gardner.
He just,
I think Chauncey had a few quotes earlier in the week.
Yeah, he
maybe.
did, and they definitely took that. There was bulletin board material, and then so they decided to run over them, which was probably the best thing they could have done to make a statement. And Nick Chubb put the ball into the end zone with a 6-yard touchdown run. So that was a great 53-yard touchdown drive. And then the second touchdown on the second series for the Bulldogs, going for the touchdown pass, was a 17-yard touchdown pass. Perfect coverage by Florida on that one, but just an absolutely perfect pass by the QB, the freshman QB, Jake Fromm.
By the way, Fromm, here's an interesting stat about Fromm, is his rating. His quarterback rating is 171.
All right.
So he's not throwing the ball a lot, but when he does, man,
he's picking the right
for
places,
a freshman.
right?
He's doing absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, well, 4 for 7 was the total on the day, I believe. So
yeah,
he's not throwing it a whole lot, but he's making good choices.
Yeah, but on the season, that quarterback rating is seasonally And so that's over. Now we've got 8 games in the books. So that's pretty effective. Mr. Eason got in the game for a little bit. Didn't throw any.
He did, and there was certainly some question by the national coverage there about whether or not he'll be playing as a Bulldog next year. But we've talked about that in previous shows, and I think we'll probably just hold on there a little bit with that, because we'll just have to wait and see with Jacob Eason as to what happens there.
Figuring it out.
And then we had, obviously, the Bulldogs went on to score a third time in the first half and made it a 21-0 first half, which was a great start for the game. And then the second half was a little. The third quarter was a little. I don't know if you call it uneasy or just Florida had the ball a whole lot. That's their time of possession came to play. Yep. They actually started running the ball, controlling the offense, and keeping the Georgia defense on the field.
Yep.
The defense didn't give very much. It was kind of a bend but don't break, as I mentioned earlier off the air. But they certainly had the ball a lot. So I think that's why Georgia did not run any points up in the third quarter.
Yeah, there's always an opportunity to make some halftime adjustments, and I'm sure Florida went into that locker room saying, "Holy cow, something we got to start pulling out some of the stops."
We got to slow it down, and that's what they did, and I agree with that, no doubt.
Well, after the game so far, these are some national level statistics.
Okay.
But Georgia's defense is third in total defense, and that's calculated as in yards allowed per game, 252 yards and on the season, and 4 yards per play. That's not giving up very much, trailing Alabama and Washington in those categories. So those are number 2. Georgia's giving up only 11 points a game. So this Saturday, Florida, they gave up less, and they really didn't like it. But we talked about that, and the defense is just giving up 94 yards per game on the rush. So really tough to run the ball against this Georgia defense. And, if you look at the scoring offense, shifting over to scoring offense, Georgia's scoring, 38 points a game. That is a ton of points. And as we talked about, that's a lot of that's coming on the ground. So nationally, the rushing offense is 10th, averaging 284 yards, and most of that credit goes to Chubb and Michelle. By the way, which Michelle's over 3,000 and Chubb is now over 4,000. So between those two running backs, you're looking at over 7,000 yards of rushing. That's
Nick
a lot.
Chubb,
of up
I believe it is. Yeah, Nick Chubb is second overall now.
I think third. Third totally, and the other 3. McFadden's 1. I think Bo Jackson is 1. I don't remember who the other one
for
was.
SEC,
so that's they're all NFLers.
Yes, they all are, and they will be going on. And obviously, Sony Michel and Nick Chubb stuck around for this game, and obviously other games. But I think this was a big reason why they stayed around for their senior years with the Georgia Bulldogs, to make sure that this was a statement game, because this was the rivalry for 4 years, and they did not want to go out with Florida dominating them. So I think they spoke loudly in their game.
Yeah, and it was close to Halloween because I saw a lot of Florida fans dressed as ghosts at about halftime.
Well, they were invisible, weren't they?
They were. Their play was ghostly.
Yeah, the players were, and then the stands emptied out for the second half. That's something you really don't see a whole lot of the Georgia-Florida game on the Florida side. But you can imagine what they must have been going through. I saw a few shots on the national coverage of a couple Florida people sleeping, a couple of fans. I'm not sure if that had anything to do with the game or if it was the pregame. With that world's largest spectacle that they're calling it down there. We won't use that word either here on the CRM Sports Network. But we certainly want to make note of that. I said Nick Chubb is number 2 for the Georgia Bulldogs, number 2 in career rushing yards.
Oh, he's number 2 career.
Career for behind Herschel. And Sony Michel is number 5, but by the end of this season, he'll probably be number 3 behind Nick Chubb. If he keeps going with the yardage that they're getting now.
Good. That's where I was going with that. Is Chubb is 5th on the SEC all-time career list. Sure. Bo Jackson, Kevin Falk, Derek McFadden. He passed Eric Rett. on Saturday. So the kid is running that football.
Yes, I agree. And it seems to me, I'm not sure if, I'm sure you could let me know how you feel about that. Folks out in our Facebook Live, feel free to make comment to us on our Facebook page. On Facebook Live, we reach comments as we're going along. But when you see these two guys who are roommates and great friends, Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel, we've talked about it in the past, talked about it again, they just seem to appreciate each other, and there doesn't seem to be any animosity for anyone getting the ball or not getting the ball regardless. I think they just seem to be happy, content with sharing the load.
And also having, and this is a teaching lesson, is they set the standard for Swift and Holyfield and the others, Georgia running backs, who are getting to see a lot of playing time. I mean, one of the things that you think about, when you got two seniors who gave up NFL money to come back,
yes.
You have to be somewhat concerned about injuries and hurting a possible NFL career, but also from a recruiting standpoint, well, we got another recruit this weekend. It certainly helps for freshmen to begin to see some playing time. Georgia has several freshmen that are seeing playing time. So on the recruiting front,
and scoring,
they're getting playing time. Yeah, absolutely.
Holyfield put it in the end zone.
Absolutely. It looks good, and Swift put it on Gardner, and they're tough. I mean, they don't look like freshmen out there running. Now, credit due to the Georgia offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely.
You remember last year, and Georgia fans will remember that the offensive line was struggling. So part of Fromm's rating has to be credited, and the Georgia running game has to be credited to Georgia's offensive line, and seem to have it pretty well together.
They do. There's no doubt about that. But having things pretty well together might be a good little segue to start talking about this national playoff system. Playoffs. Uh-oh. I
don't think Jim Moore will ever live that one down.
Absolutely not.
Playoffs,
no doubt. But let's get into that decision that committee has on Tuesday, or that announcement, I should say, about their decisions with the ratings going into the first of the year for 2017, the first playoff standing brackets listing according to the national committee. It's going to, it looks like, obviously, right now with the couple of losses out there over the weekend by TCU and by Penn State, that there's going to be a shakeup in this.
Yeah, the folks in Buckeye land are living large. If you look at the polls, the AP has Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Notre Dame. On the coaches poll, a little bit different. Alabama, Georgia, Buckeyes, Wisconsin. And they have Clemson at the number 5 spot. And then Mr. Richt in Miami. Penn State falls to number 7 in both of the polls. Yeah. So one loss. And then that was a good game, but it was Penn State had, quite honestly, a gauntlet to go through. They still have Michigan State.
Sure thing.
So, and that's an ex-SEC coach up there doing a pretty good job at Penn State.
And I'll tell you, I wasn't I think the Miami team floundered a little bit. They just kind of they struggled, and to be up where they are this past weekend, I think they did struggle in this game, and they just couldn't seem to get their act together early in that game or throughout that game.
Yeah, not a dominating season for Miami. They were playing Tech, and Miami just hasn't dominated. They've had a couple of wins where maybe they're just getting by, but they are undefeated. And so, the unbeatens now are Alabama, Georgia, Wisconsin, Miami, and those are the only unbeaten. So what the playoff committee is really looking at now is that one loss. So in past history, Georgia by now, we've talked about it. Well, Georgia could have that one slip-up loss. We're not, but these other teams have. Clemson being one that lost to Syracuse. Notre Dame is got to be in the discussion. Their loss by 1 point was to Georgia. Ohio State, their loss, I forget who Ohio State lost to. Look that up. It was earlier in Oklahoma.
Yes.
So, that's a pretty high-level opponent there with Oklahoma number 8 in the AP poll. So it'll be interesting on Halloween 7 p.m. is the announcement that the playoff committee has got the tough job of taking these polls, throw them out the window, and
there's going to be some scariness out
pick
there.
the
I wonder
four.
how scary this four will be, and what the announcements and what campuses will be doing across the country when their team does not make it into the Final Four. That could be some fun reports coming across the country. But for the most part, I think the playoff selection they'll get it right for the most part. They will have some trickiness come towards the end of the season when Georgia looks like they'll play Alabama. That's how it seems to be lining up, unless something trips either one of those
and
teams.
that will affect things in the four. So that game, December the 2nd, if you continue to play well and Georgia beats South Carolina, Auburn, Kentucky, Georgia Tech, to run the table, then you're in that discussion. And I've even seen for this first one, though, because it's fun to talk about, we saw some fodder. David Pollock, former UGA star, comes out and actually has put Georgia at number one. A few other media folks, too.
They, too. I tell you what, hold on to that thought. We'll come back in a second. We're going to take a quick break here on DawgDial, and we'll talk about them, those national correspondents that are talking about Georgia possibly being number one on the ratings or on the list for the playoffs. So stick with us, Dog fans. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm your host, Josh Mendlinger, with Taco Thompson, my partner here, and you are listening to DawgDial on CRM Sports Network, or Sports Broadcasting Network. We are on broadcasting after all our Georgia Bulldog football games this year, and our flagship radio station is Real Country Q 92.3 WMOQ FM in Athens, Monroe. For a podcast of today's show, or any of the nearly 300, I think now, episodes of DawgDial, simply go to iTunes and search for DawgDial in the podcast section. And if you'd like to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter at DawgDial, or on Facebook Live. You can comment in right now as we are broadcasting live. And Taco, as we are broadcasting live here, there are many of the broadcasters across the country that are possibly even penciling in Georgia as the number one seed in this playoff system. It's a possibility.
Bama folks would not like to hear you say that, J-Dog.
Well, but we are not in Alabama country. We are in the Dog Nation over here.
Well, Mr. Saban over there in the big Roll Tide machine, you got to give them a little bit of that historical perspective.
Yes.
To have Alabama at the top, and everybody likes the big David Goliath story. But, let's face it, if you look at maybe not all the SEC, and I'm not a big SEC bandwagon guy saying, hey, the conference is the best. I think there's good conferences. The Big Ten is a good conference.
Absolutely.
And the Big 12 when it wants to be. Pac-12 maybe not so much, but the two teams, there's some work to be done out on the West Coast. But if you look at a clear number one and number two after this weekend, the clarity of it is that Georgia and Alabama are the clear number one and two. That makes for an interesting dynamic when they do come to Atlanta and play that game. Then what happens? If even if Georgia's number one or Alabama's number one, whatever, and let's say it plays out and Georgia stays dominant, Alabama stays dominant. Alabama, has rankings statistically at the top in a lot of major categories. A lot of people would say that Georgia has a better performance and strength of schedule.
Right. The FSU win by Alabama
doesn't look all that great now.
All that great, Rob, because they are struggling, FSU. So the win against Notre Dame is
in South Bend away. If you're a committee member, you're sitting there and you darn sure know that a win in South Bend now looks a lot better. Notre Dame this weekend, having defeated the previously ranked NC State Wolfpack pretty handily, I might add, at 35-14. Notre Dame also doesn't have any cupcakes on their schedule. Notre Dame plays an FBS schedule year in, year out. I mean, some teams maybe like Army or some of that, but Ohio State moved up. Where does that leave Clemson? Where does that leave Ohio State against some of these one-loss teams? Penn State still looked pretty mighty against Ohio State. But, you've got three teams in the Big Ten. Right. Wisconsin's undefeated. They're in their division, and they will clash with either Ohio State or Penn State, the winner of that bracket for the Big Ten title. So that's going to drop somebody. But the Badgers so far looking good. The Canes in Miami have to be in the conversation. TCU dropped themselves out, I think, of the conversation by losing to Iowa State.
Which is a great story there. I don't know if you followed that quarterback story over there.
I did not.
That they, I believe the Iowa State quarterback was a walk-on, was bouncing around a couple different teams for a while there, and then came back to Iowa to play, and he's doing well in the last two games that he's been starting. So
he's in the national stage, but So who are your four picks? So you're Mr. Football Playoff Committee, sir. Well, you've got to give four. Which one are you going to give?
Well, I don't know. If I'm sitting down next to Condoleezza Rice on that committee, right, and she's asking, or I'm asking, I'd have to obviously go with, you have to have Bama, you have to have Georgia in there. Which is one, which is two? That's debatable right now. Do you give Bama their due? Give them the nod towards number one just by the pure history and their consistency over the years? That is a part of the consideration. As much as people would hate to say it, that is part of the talk. Is what have you done over the last couple of years, and how high level of your program's been recently?
I'd love to, as a Georgia fan, I'd love to go ahead and give Bama the number one. I'd like the scenario there. It
give them a target.
Gets me a little riled up there.
I agree.
But SEC, that's going to leave a couple of conference players out. So the ACC, Clemson, with the loss from NC State, the only other ACC team showing up in the top 15. Well, I'll take that back. Miami, and we've talked about Miami, but Virginia Tech. So if I'm a playoff committee member, I'm also looking at conferences, and right now on the AP, it's the SEC and the Big Ten, Notre Dame being the independent. So you've got the ACC's on the bubble, the Big 12 is out, the Pac-12 is out. Yeah. So you're a two conference and an independent race in this college football poll right now.
I'm wondering. I think my other two would be right now, Ohio State and possibly Notre Dame. Now, you did mention before that Wisconsin's undefeated. Notre Dame, obviously, the losing to Georgia. I wonder. One has to wonder in that meeting room. Does the independence of Notre Dame loom large with them? Does the NCAA come up and say, hey, they're independent. They should be part of they shouldn't be.
Well, they won't. They'll play one less game than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's going to be the quality of those games that they'll have to look closely into. But I think it does hurt Notre Dame a little bit by not being in a conference when you're talking about these playoffs. And that was not evident when it's just voting for who's number one. But now that you're going to these conference championships, hey, everybody else is playing a conference championship. Notre Dame, where are you?
Where are you? And all they're doing is holding out for money, supposedly, their own TV money. And that's really what it comes down to, from what everyone understands. And that's the world looking in, or from the outside looking in. It looks like they're all about getting their TV money and their coverage.
Very well could cost them money.
And it could cost them money because they may not get to the championship, the Final Four.
Yep. So SEC, it'd be hard no matter what happens. And again, hate to think ahead. That's what we do in the media is, you hate to sit here and say either Georgia or Alabama, again, assuming they run the table, whichever the loser is of that game, you've got, let's assume everybody else runs the table. You might have, in the Big Ten, I don't know that Wisconsin is going to beat either Ohio State or Penn State in that Big Ten championship. But, it's going to come down to, does the committee look at conferences? Are they trying to pick somebody? If you've got two SEC teams in there, do you pick an ACC player, or do you pick a Big 12? Oklahoma sitting there, and they may not say it out loud, but I can certainly tell you that it would be in the back of my mind on the global view of college football landscape to have representation from as many conferences as you can get.
Absolutely.
So I don't like that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it could have an impact.
They will try to placate everybody that they can, keep everybody happy. That's for certain. The big thing is that this is just the first one. And there's still plenty of football to be played. I mean, there's still 4 games left on the season for the Georgia Bulldogs, as well as the potential for the SEC championship game. So that's a possible 5th game left. And there's still a lot of football to be played, Taco. And I think while a top rating would be nice to have right now, number 1 spot, I think Georgia Bulldogs would be very happy with a 2 or even a 3 if that's where they fall. But I believe it'll be number 2. But there still is lots of football to be played, of where there could be a stumbling block here and there. I don't see Georgia really getting beat, but it's possible. Anything's possible, and that's why they play the games.
Well, it's a good point. And this is, again, going back to previous years under the Rick era, or any other coaches for that matter, not just to point Coach Rick, but it always does seem like Georgia's in a dogfight. And one game drops, maybe a couple of games drop. The 9-3 finish, bowl game, It's not there this year at Georgia. Georgia is winning, with the exception of Notre Dame, which is why I would have to put Notre Dame up there in one of those 4 slots right now. It's because that was a well-played game in South Bend, and it was a 1-point game. So, but
I'll agree with you on that one. So I tell you what, let's take another quick break here on DawgDial. We'll be right back, Dog fans. Stick with us and give us your comments on Facebook or on Twitter at DawgDial. And we will be more than happy to include your comments in our broadcast here on DawgDial each and every week. So look forward to being right back with you. Stick with us. Go Dogs.
Let's do it.
All right, welcome back on Facebook Live as well as on the DawgDial listening network family out there. We are here in Buffalo's in Woodstock, Georgia on Highway 92. Thanks for joining us. We are broadcasting with our fans and friends here at this wonderful location where we have great food, great beverages, and a great environment. So come on down and join us here at Buffalo's anytime you can for the DawgDial broadcast. We're going to get into a few more things right now, Taco. One quick note is that the Bulldogs pulled off another big recruiting win with a number 3 running back, James Cook, coming into the Bulldog Nation next year for 2018. He's I believe, 5'11", almost 6 foot running back out of Miami, Florida, 181 pounds, and the younger brother of Dalvin Cook for the Minnesota Vikings.
There you go. Yeah, I watched some of the huddle film on this kid. He can fly.
Yeah.
So, and look, one of the things that I would bring up is you see a lot of Georgia's recruits, and you look at what their offers list are, and obviously everybody knows who the 3, 4, 5 stars are. Cook is a 4-star running back coming into a stable of running back U in the UGA. But interestingly, this winning helps recruiting scenario is really going to start to play itself out. We're going to talk a little bit about coaching in this segment too, because look at what you've got going on in the SEC. You've got Alabama has been at a high level for several years, and they're getting recruits. But the interesting thing that I'm seeing is that on a lot of these offer sheets of these Georgia recruits, I see Alabama offers onto that list. So what you're looking at is you're seeing some of these Georgia recruits being picked off, and maybe Georgia's getting some of the recruits that Alabama may have gotten in previous eras.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt that you're stealing them away from Florida as well. The state of Florida, between the Gators and the Seminoles, FSU. Obviously, James Cook decommitted from FSU in July and is now coming to the Bulldogs. Mm-hmm. So that, I think, winning does cure of many ills when it comes to recruiting. What do you think?
It helps a lot. Now let's make sure all of these commits get signed on the line
and stay in school.
And
because that's part of it. Look what Florida's
enroll
going through right
early.
now.
Oh yeah. So some of the suspensions, that's part of Florida's problems, which again we'll talk about now. Because it ties into recruiting.
Sure does.
Butch Jones up at Tennessee. I mean, he's on a hotter seat. McElwain lost his hot seat. It's not hot anymore. So now look at all those recruits out there kind of wondering, okay, what's going to happen at Tennessee? What's going to happen at Florida? Some of those commits right now may be thinking a little bit of a question mark there because new staff. A new coach is probably going to bring a new staff.
Well, yeah, and you went through the recruiting yourself back in the day. My question, I'll just throw this out there. We don't have to talk about it a whole lot, but some people wonder: do you think the players should be allowed to relocate if that coach, the head coach, leaves? Are they committing to the coach? Are they committing to the team? Are they committing to the school? Where should that lie?
I think it has a lot to do with the coaching and the coaching staff. Mm-hmm. And, obviously the program should be number one, and you hear all the talk about facilities, and these people are all building these programs are all building these mega $1 million indoor practice facility. Okay. And somehow, some way that impresses some of these kids. But I'll tell you what impresses the kids is a continuity on the coaching staff, a winning program, and exposure to next level athletics.
Opportunity.
A lot of these kids playing in the SEC would probably come out of high school and think, well, if I'm good enough to play in the SEC, I just might be good enough to play in the NFL. And then you go start looking at all the jerseys and all the players that have graduated from that particular university and under that coaching staff, because a lot of these coaches have ties into the NFL. They want to know who the kid is.
Right.
Once you go to that level,
Right.
then there's a whole lot of analysis done on the athlete. So, and there's a lot of that done in college. But here's what I'll say about Georgia and recruiting is I think Nick Saban is known for recruiting talent. I mean, he does work hard and diligently about recruiting talent and recognizing that talent. Of course, you got to do something when you get the talent in your program. But wow, it's a good spot for Georgia to be in. I think they're going to rival Alabama, and I think already statistically they're in the top 5 in recruiting this year. So it's going to be another great class. So the winning keeps everything alive in the recruiting world.
That's for certain. I think these kids are looking for the exposure, and the moms back home are looking for the consistency for their young men that are going off to school. They don't want a program that's in upheaval. They don't want a program that is going to be iffy, and they don't want a man coaching them who is
Gets
iffy
death
themselves.
threats.
Right.
Death threats.
Or supposed death threats, right? Because that's what's in question here.
Isn't that
whether
wacky?
It actually happened.
Boy, that's wacky. Now look, here's today's news is so. There was a meeting about it. Okay,
right.
McElwain, you're fired. So now, then it becomes about the buyout. Right. So the interesting dynamic here that I want to see what happens is, I think the buyout was like $12.5 million. So something like that.
Yes.
That was the number
it's big.
And so that's a big number. But now it's a question of, by the way, Jim, would you mind giving back some of that buyout money? We don't want to. Pay. So this will be an interesting scenario.
Well, it's going to come down to the lawyers, as usually does. They're all going to fight over the contract and whether or not he violated any part of his contract ethically with this claim, and if they prove it wrong or what other reasons they might have with the suspensions and everything else going on in Florida. That seems to be a distraction to the program. What they categorize or list their firing of him as, that will determine
I think it's
how much money.
For cause, so this may be that borderline, but I'm sure it's a negotiation. Better for that to be settled sooner than later, especially when you are recruiting. A lot of these athletes are coming to the program and coming to the stadium. Interesting to see. Florida's on tough times, as well as Tennessee. If you look up there in Knoxville, there are a lot of people who are anxious and angry and ready for a change. And I think even Coach Jones at Tennessee has a fairly sizable buyout. So these long-term contracts, I mean, you look no further, too, than Michigan, who signed up Harbaugh. And he's getting $7+ million. He's in the top 2 or 3 in college coaches. That's a lot of money. So
they're not happy.
You might want to win some football games if you're making that much money.
I agree with you on that. It is big time winning that calls for big time money, and vice versa. So the question is, what is going on with Georgia? Georgia seems to have the right approach going on. Kirby Smart does. Obviously, he learned under Saban, and he's carrying that through Georgia, because I just want to bring back that Georgia is doing well right now. You're not hearing a lot about issues. There were a few suspensions, a couple players that were back on the field after some suspensions and injuries.
I think there's one that's coming
still
back,
there.
but fairly clean.
Fairly clean, all in all. And I think that's a good thing, and that goes towards a winning attitude and a winning approach, and obviously bottom line.
And players, I think prospective players see new players and see how the coaching staff is turning around, and those players out there listen to radio and they hear media folks talk about it. They hear the dynamic, and he's a player's coach, and players having fun, leadership, winning, record setting, first time rankings, all of the good talk out there. And plus, for Georgia fans, Coach Smart is from Georgia. He played at Georgia. You don't see this much in college football, where the former player is the head coach.
Right.
And, of course, that means that you recruit strong at home in your backyard, and a lot of those Georgia players, and Georgia does have a lot of talent in the state. But going forward, I think you'll see a lot of those players stay here at home to play.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a great thing for Georgia for the future, as we see with the recruiting class. We're going to take one last break here at Buffalo's Cafe on DawgDial. We'll be right back to wrap up our show and get to look for some comments from our folks out in Facebook Live world. Give us a comment and get some questions going. I think we have a question coming in from last week that we'll answer as well. We'll be right back. Stick with us on DawgDial. All right, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm your host, Josh Mendlinger with Taco Thompson, and we are here wrapping up our show for this week after the Georgia-Florida game. And I just want to make mention that we had a question come in over the many different methods of communicating with us at DawgDial about the Kirby versus Muschamp.
Did you get some more snail mail?
I got some more snail mail. I did. You're right. There was a stamp or two. I'm not sure if the stamp on there was the right amount. I think it was a little over. But the question was, who will win the battle of the former coach mates? What's the correct term for that, Taco? Are you coach mates? Teammates? But
Coaching colleagues.
Colleagues. There you
Mr.
go.
Muschamp is at South Carolina. We'll talk about South Carolina. A lot of these SEC coaches come from
Pedigree
from within, and that coaching tree is nearby. So a lot of these coaches know each other. So, in my opinion, I think the winner of the Kirby Smart Will Muschamp contest for this weekend, I'm going to have to go with Coach Smart and to outsmart. And by the way, did you see that McElwain said it was a smart move to put Fromm at the quarterback this past week. So
Really?
that may have been another McElwain camel
Moment,
straw
yeah.
that breaks the
Yeah,
camel
sure.
back. But yeah, no, the South Carolina Gamecocks, Coach Muschamp and Coach Smart know each other. Of course, Muschamp was down at Florida too. And a lot of these guys have I think what they have is fairly similar smiles. If you look at Muschamp, he was a defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Okay, so the dynamic here is Coach Saban was known as a defensive guy.
Right.
Coach Smart Saban was a defensive back. He played at Kent State, I think, so small college. And so Muschamp was also a defensive coordinator. So the interesting thing there in this trend in the SEC is, hey, it might be wise to get you a defensive coordinator as a head coach.
Right. Maybe let the offensive coordinators run the offense, but let the head coach be a defensive. Defense wins championships is the old motto, and it's showing true a little bit here.
Sure working out for Georgia.
It sure is.
Sure working out.
It seems good. The South Carolina game coming up is going to be a good
back
battle.
in Athens. The Dogs get to come back in
and
Athens.
I think that's a big plus for Georgia going into this game. They're comfortable between the hedges. I think that although South Carolina's not far behind them, if there are a couple slip-ups by Georgia, the Gamecocks are right on their tail.
Well, my point exactly.
Okay,
so look at this game, and the South Carolina Gamecocks are number 2. So, and they're already bowl eligible. So I think on the season they are 6-2 and 4-2 in the conference. They're coming off a win against Vandy. Statistically, you won't see the Gamecocks at the top of any boards. I think they struggled early in the year, but they may have righted the ship a little bit here, and they're playing some pretty decent football. So I can almost promise you that South Carolina will give the Georgia Bulldogs a lot more fight than the Gators did.
I think they will. I agree with you on that one. I think the question is how will the Georgia respond to coming back and such a big wing off Florida? Will they? Unfortunately, some players overlook. They look past it. We got to make sure they're not looking to December, that they are looking at South Carolina, then Auburn, then Kentucky, and Georgia Tech, and make sure that they are taking it week by week and game by game. And I think that'll be a key.
Yeah, and I've seen some quotes. Immediately, players get asked. The Carolina players get asked after the game. Well, you've got at the time number 3 Georgia coming off their undefeated streak, and you're having to go to Athens. And a lot of these players, if they're smart, won't be giving out a bunch of bulletin board material. So far, I think Muschamp has coached them up and said, look, don't be pumping out any bulletin board material this week. We're going to go to Georgia, but those players at South Carolina, they're going to be coming to Athens with the expectation, and that's the position you want to be in. You want to knock off the big dogs, the big red dogs.
That's true. There's a big target on the back of the Bulldogs right now, and I think it's important that the players stick to their game plan, stick with the leadership that they have, and I think they will do fine. I think they come out ahead. I think the Bulldogs certainly dominate this game. I think the running game they'll stick to it. I think they'll go with that very same game plan of run, and then if you need to throw the ball, we'll throw it.
Throw a bomb.
Throw a
run,
bomb.
yeah. Throw a bomb.
That might
run,
throw a bomb. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Hopefully they can stick with it. So.
I think they were, 75% run, 25% pass. I think Georgia is going to stick with that. By the way, the play calling going back has steadied, so I think we're going to see a little bit more of that this coming up week against Carolina.
Absolutely. I think we have some good things to look forward to in our next show, which we'll be talking about recapping that South Carolina game. I think the Bulldogs will prevail. You got a prediction on some scores there for it? What do you think the points will be there?
This is a pretty good rivalry. It's not the natural rival for Georgia, but they go after a lot of the same recruits. Carolina traditionally gets the Carolina kids. They're fighting now with Clemson, but Columbia and Athens have been good competitors over the years, but I would say that the Open is still going to be in that 2-touchdown spread. I just don't see anybody being able to stop the Georgia running game. So I'm going to come out and give the nod to the Dogs on my prediction by 14. I'll say, since we're averaging 38 points a game, I'm going to say the Gamecocks hold the Dogs to maybe 31. So how about a 31-17 prediction?
That's 31-17. Let me write that down here.
Okay.
31-17.
Yep.
31-17. Okay.
Book it, J-Dog.
You bet. All right, Taco. I think you're on the right track with that. I'm going to give the Bulldogs an extra couple points there. So I think I'm going to give them another 2 field goal type of points. So I'm going to go with a 37 points for the Bulldogs, and I'm going to stick around in the teens. So I'm going to go 37-14, something like that.
As long as the Dogs, again, we've talked about consistency. Penalties have been at a minimum. Turnovers have been at a minimum. We saw a little bit of a pass rush, but consistency in the running game and all those things. Special teams play, we didn't mention it earlier, but in red zone performance, Georgia's still perfect. Mm-hmm. And if you look at those small things, man, those small things are all adding up. So Georgia, when they go against a rival like a South Carolina, something has to happen in South Carolina's favor in some of those small categories. Yes. And to change the tide of the game and for the Gamecocks to have any shot at winning, especially in Athens. It's going to be a hostile environment. Georgia fans are fired up out there.
They are.
And, boy, I'd hate to be going play in between the hedges right now.
That's true, and I think it's going to be a great one, especially coming off such a big win against Florida. The Bulldog Nation is fired up, and the Gamecocks coming to town might be chicken feed.
You hear a lot about the deflation, though. Be careful. That's a big bubble. It's a long away game, and boy, what you don't want to do is interrupt any of this momentum that you've got going.
Well,
in Dog Nation.
Okay. Well, all we can say is we need the players to heal up. Those who need to heal up, get some rest this week. The players who are suspended, get themselves back on track, get back on the field. We need everybody on the field on the same page, working towards that goal of that SEC championship. So what we're going to do right now is wrap it up. I want to let you know, appreciate everyone joining us on Facebook Live here at Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia, and on the CRM Broadcasting Network. The executive producer of DawgDial is John Rawl. Thank you to my co-host, Taco Thompson. Special thanks to our hosts and hostesses and serving staff here at Buffalo's Cafe, as well as management. I'm Josh Mendlinger. Thank you for listening to DawgDial is a production of CRM Sports. For more information, visit crmsports.com. Go Dogs.